I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which each of us are meeting on today. So, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I'm meeting today with you from Widgerunga. I've forgotten what it's called now. Damn it. Brunswick, Widgerunga land, which you know what it's called. Who knows what it's called? Where am I? Widgerunga, thank you. Widgerunga people land. So anyway, I think it's really important that we acknowledge our traditional owners. Thank you all for coming, and I'll hand you over to GH, who's going to run you through the A-SPEC. S-Spec. Is it S-Spec today? It is, sewage.
Yes. Yeah, good guess there, Kelly. Now, welcome everyone. And look, if you've just come on in the last few minutes, you may have been entertained by some of the banter that was going on, but typically the time before we start our forums, we've committed to just getting to know people, having different conversations. And if you've been to our earlier forums, you would have seen Kelly talk about her cat and how it used to fit into her tissue box when it was just a kitten, and right through to, you know, what we talked about today about the potential premiers being Geelong. So we've got broad interests. So Kelly, do you want to? We'll be running polls during the session today, and on the screen you'll see at the bottom left there's a little portrait there with a couple of cogs in the portrait. That whenever that slide comes up, it means that there's a poll that will be presented, and there's a couple of ways that the polls will come up. It'll either come up on your screen and or come up in the chat as well. Kelly will leave the polls live so that if you miss one or want to come back to it, and sometimes there's multiple opportunities to enter things. Our agenda today is fairly straightforward. You know, we've got a lot to talk about, and really today is confirming what is going to come up with the updated documents that are going to be released at the beginning of next year. So tail end of this year, beginning of next year. So for those of you that attended our National Forum last year, you'll see some of the material. It's familiar. So what we're doing is confirming what is going to come up. Now, nothing's set in concrete. If you have additional comments that you want to make about things, now is the perfect time to do it, between now and December, when we're going to finalise our documents. So housekeeping, if you need to keep your phone on, no problem, please keep it on silent. If you're accessing this event through your phone, we request that if you do get a call, sometimes we've had the situation where we've been put on hold and we've heard the lovely Telstra music and it sort of drowns out what we're trying to do. Feel free to log out and then log back in. Kelly's monitoring people that are coming in and out and making sure that they get access to the forums. So Kelly, have you been kicking off some of the polls? Great.
I have, but there's some minor issues.
Okay.
I'll work on those in the background while you continue on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. So you'll see the polls pop up, and Kelly will address any issues that you may have. One of the things that we do encourage you to do is to put comments in the chat. Feel free to take yourself off mute to comment on where we want this to be as interactive as possible. This is our third year now that we're running our forums, and what we're finding now is that people are now comfortable and used to questions being asked during the sessions. So if you miss asking a question, that's okay. Put it in the chat box and Kelly will bring it up and raise it with either myself or Gaby during the tech session, and we'll endeavour to answer it. If we need to take it on notice and respond, we will. So I'm going to start off with governance. Governance is a really important part of the A-SPEC initiative, and it's not really, it doesn't really stand out, but what we've done is we've built it into the different elements, and I'll show you some of those elements over the next few slides. And so I'm going to start with the asset and asset data handover checklist. This is a checklist that we created last year, or it might have even, no, it's actually the year before, and it came out of a request from a council who asked us, how do we know what assets we're going to get? Because there wasn't the communication between their area that was assessing assessing the applications and their area in the asset management area, and so they weren't familiar with what variations. So we created this checklist, and the intention of the checklist is that it can be used as part of the project assessment phase, whether it's a community project, whether it's capital works or subdivision, or it might be other. We encourage you to use this and to communicate this with your consultants. We've been doing a lot of data capture over the last few years, and since we've created this, we give it to the consultants, and it's become a really easy aspect to know exactly what's expected, and then we can go over it. You know, we went over, we had a job recently that we were asked to quote on a building, on a B-SPEC project, and the consultant identified all of the assets, and there was quite a few, and it spanned across all the specifications. And what we discovered was that they identified some assets, such as telecommunication conduits and lighting, that weren't actually the council assets. So we're able to remove that. But more importantly, this project was going to be completed, or is going to be completed, in 2 years' time. So using the checklist, we tied that in with our fee proposal, and now they have that on file to know exactly what's going to be delivered at that time. So if there's a change of personnel during projects, then they can go back to that. Now we have a poll here, and so the question is this something that you would make use of, that would be useful for you? And these polls that we've been running have been from the first forum, so the responses are cumulative, and overwhelmingly we see that people acknowledge that these checklists would save time. So, and I'll show you during the wrap up how to access the checklist. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about existing versus new, and what do I mean by that? So one of the things that we did was we created 2 specifications. Now, I know that some of you may be thinking, you know, having enough trouble identifying one, now how can I differentiate with this other one? Well, the purpose of the 2 is that when you have new works, such as subdivision developments or capital works projects, or even community projects, you would use the specification that's identified on the right of that screen. And we call those the DDS specification. So S-Spec DDS version 2.0.6 relates to all new assets. S-Spec existing version relates to assets that are already existing, and it may be used for audits in the field, retrospective data capture, backlog data capture. And I'll show you the difference over the next couple of slides. They are completely aligned. And what I mean by that is whatever attributes and whatever asset classes and attributes you see in one, you'll see in the other. So the master is S-Spec DDS, and the aligned version is S-Spec existing. So the main difference is for the S-Spec existing, we've added an extra column. And the column, we've categorized every single attribute to identify if it's going to be a core requirement, if it's going to be a required field but may need more research. And a couple of forums ago during A-SPEC, someone said, well, George, instead of YR, can we have RR? I said, sure. And I said, so is that to relate to research required? And the response was yes. So they're the kind of requests that we receive and we can make decisions on fairly quickly. So I guess the point of that is no request is too small. If it's important to you, then make the request, and then it's a conversation. So getting back to these categories, and then we have fields that are optional. So if we look at the DDS version, which is for new assets, if you've used S-Spec or becoming familiar with S-Spec, this is what you will see for pressure mains. All of the attributes and information there. Now, when you open up the existing document, it's exactly the same. The only difference is that there's a column to the right. And I picked this one in particular because it's got the three elements of the core, the research required, and the optional. And our philosophy has been very simple. If somebody goes out in the field, what can they physically see? So we've determined the attributes that are core are the ones that can be physically seen. And the optional ones are, look, if you know what it is, great, put it in, but it's not required, not essential. And then the research required is more information required. Now, it may be that if you do the research, you can't find any further information, and that's okay. Then you just enter the default. Now, there's one other thing that I want to highlight in this. And what I've put that ellipse around is the response of groundwater. Yes, no, or unknown. In the existing versions, we have it's likely to be unknown. So that is a valid entry. Unknown is a valid entry for some fields. In the DDS versions, the new versions, unknown is not a valid entry. So whenever we're validating data that councils send through to us, and also other consultants who prepare validation scripts, we say to them, if it's new data, you do not accept unknown. You do not accept not applicable, unless it's like a conditional field where one field needs to be populated, which means the other field is not populated. So just be aware of that. So the data governance also extends to the requests that come from the consultants. So what we know is that there's specific instances where surveyors have agreed to deliver on some of these requests, and I've identified two of those. One is a request for some assets not to be delivered and to process assets differently to what's identified in the specs. And I've brought this up at every forum, and I want to, and I know that there are people who have come to some of the other forums, and particularly consultants, and I see, I think Shane's there, Shane Sewell from Mill American. So thank you for coming along to a number of forums, Shane. And we work, and it's important that we work closely with the surveyors because the specs have been agreed to by the community. And therefore, if there are requests that are variations to what's in the specs, it's not something that GISA supports because it has an impact. And we want the community to consider the impact to the surveyors or the organisation that's engaged to do the data creation and supply. So our position is that the community's endorsed and agreed on what is going to be in the specs. If you want to vary that, that's no problem. It's a conversation. So our suggestion and recommendation is that if there's some post-processing that needs to be required because let's just say you want to resegment the way that some of the linear data has been presented to you. There's one or two ways to do it. Post-process it within your organisation, or if you think it's going to be of benefit to the broader community, then make a suggestion for a request to modify the specifications, and we'll take that on board, have a conversation with you, moderate or facilitate that conversation with the community, and then it becomes a change and will be reflected in an update to the documents. This has also come about where we see consultants are required or have been requested to capture other authorities' assets. And we see this a lot more so with the councils, but I wanted to mention again GISA's position on this. We see that there are more cons than pros to this. And I've listed a few of them there. But I remember from my time working at Melbourne Water, one of the things that was heavily advocated. Oh, Kelly, would you just monitor the muting of participants when needed, please? So our position is that be in communication with the other authority. If it's important that you want to collect that data, then just consider entering into a data access and data sharing agreement. And that way, with technology these days getting web service feeds, you no longer have to worry about it. If you're getting a web service feed, then you're going to see what's current, what's changed. And that's far safer, far more risk averse than capturing it once and thinking that it's there. I've seen too many decisions being made on data that's been captured and then used to make decisions that have resulted in financial penalties to that organisation. So data governance also extends to these two areas, noting deviation from design and the asset recording principles. And I'm going to cover those in the next couple of slides. So noting deviation from design, we're not talking about the WASA requirements that has what the standards are for, the tolerances of the difference between design and construction. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is if there's been a specific change, that results in a variation from what the design plans issued for construction are, then we request that this be recorded, and a very simple note that it's actually been authorized or not. And we want to start using this as part of the confirmation and validation process. We know that if we start getting this in as a digital document, then when the data is being provided to the asset management team to confirm that what's been handed over actually exists, it'll make a significant difference. And it can also be compared with the notes taken by the construction supervisors or the subdivision supervisors from your organisations that are required to sign off on changes that occur out in the field. So we see that this is a really important aspect, and we've incorporated this in every specification. This is already existing in S-Spec, but now we've broadened it across all of the specifications. Along with that, we've also included asset recording accuracy principles. Now, in general terms, we're saying that plus or minus 0.1 horizontally, and depending on the kind of infrastructure, so let's just say invert levels, we know that that's dependent upon the terrain. So it may be that plus or minus 30 mil might be the norm, but if it's flat terrain and the invert levels and gradients are really critical, then it's likely that that accuracy needs to be better than 30 mil. Once again, it'll come down to the member agency, the water authority, specifying what their specific requirements are as a deliverable. There's going to be more detail about this. We've developed a whole document which looks at every type of asset class, and we've looked at the accuracy requirements and the precision requirements for every asset class. And it's going to become part of our overarching A-SPEC document, which is a companion document. And we will be working on that and presenting it in November for people to comment on. Our intention is that it is published along with the updates so that there is some guidance as to what can be expected. Now, Kelly, I haven't got the little head with the cogs there, but there is a poll there to launch following the checklist. If you could.
What is the question of the poll?
The question of the poll is, do you align with the accuracy principles? It's a yes, no. And then there's a follow-up question for people who say no.
Okay, I've got it. I spelt principles wrong, don't judge me.
Principalese. I like it. It's okay. See, we are fallible.
Because I'm recreating the polls. For some reason, the polls just aren't doing what they should be doing.
Okay.
And I don't know why.
Okay, just keep monitoring as you're doing.
No, Gabby, it's not working.
Yes.
Okay. I might need to recreate that poll again. So just continue on and I'll pop it up in a minute.
Yep, thanks. So a couple of polls will come up. So just be mindful that the question is, this has been sitting in S-Spec for since the last version, which was published in 2019, and will stay there. So we're talking about the accuracy principles now. Now, on data governance, we've also built in spatial relationships and connectivity. You won't hear us talking about topology. You won't hear us talking about network tracing, although we know how critical that is, both of those elements are. So what we've done is that we've built them we've built those requirements in the way that in this example here, instrument transmitting device on the sewer main, that we have the instrument transmitting device and a couple of attributes linking it to the feature that it's attached to. So that way we can build a structure to show connectivity and spatial relationships. And Gaby is going to talk more about spatial relationships and some of the checks that we recommend that are done when data comes in, and also, and it's based on our own experience and Gaby's experience in creating those checks. So, you know, essentially, all assets are part of a greater whole, and we work on the basis that there are specific relationships that make up the digital models on which we build those greater views and we make our informed decisions on. And these will form part of a digital twin environment. So we're constantly looking at how we can future-proof the specs to fit in with the trends that are emerging through digital twins, smart cities, digital engineering. I often show this, and I want to reinforce it because I think there's a fundamental conversation going on about points versus polygons for access points. And I totally get the importance of having points, particularly from a network tracing perspective and you know, the connectivity model. But I just want to create the environment for you about our thinking and why we've created it this way. And this comes back to a question about from a consultant, how precise do we have to be with linear elements linked to other elements? So I'm going to use access points and pipes in this example. So let's just say we have two access points. And you can see, and I've deliberately done irregular shaped objects. And we know that when pipes are built or constructed, they typically go to the edge of the access point structure, or sometimes just inside, like the one on the left, where there's an internal drop. That's okay. So our principles are that that's not where we stop the network, because schematically we need to show a connected network. So what we recommend is that there are vertices created at the edge of the structure, so that in this line here, this becomes one line. It's not a line from here to here and then a separate line here to here. What we're saying in the current environment is this is all one line. Hopefully you can see my mouse on the screen. And that way we connect to a point. The point is arbitrary. As we progress more and more through the 3D environment, through Revit in particular, we're going to see exactly where those channels are. So that's really important.
Sorry, George, I just want to interrupt there. I'm just trying a different system for those two polls. So the last question was, do we agree with those principles? And yes or no. And if you selected no, if you could tell us what you would suggest instead, would be great.
Okay. I've got a message on my screen, Kelly. It says sign into your Poly account.
Just ignore it. No one else should have that message.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it as well. And it was
you do?
admin
Okay.
approval.
I got it, yeah.
All right. I'll try something else. Keep going.
Okay, thanks. I thought I was special then. Never mind. Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for letting us know. So getting back to this. Okay, so what's the point? Now, if we're going to go point to point, no problem. However, we do not want to have this red dashed line as the actual alignment. For obvious reasons, this misrepresents what the actual alignment is. We've seen this instance in a council that we worked with a few years ago when they were managing their D-SPEC data, their stormwater drainage data, and they sent out notices to the consultants. Yes, no problem. You can build there, and they built there, and they broke into the pipe network. Now, the council got sued, and they had to wear the cost of reinstating the pipe and also the delays on the project. So the deliverable, if you're going to use point to point, needs to look like this to reflect the actual alignment of the pipe. It does look a little bit weird, right? However, if we're collecting the details about the polygon, that will also help from a dial before you dig perspective. And you're going to get the experience that there's certainty around the data, and that creates confidence in the asset location. And as I mentioned, particularly with dial before you dig. Now I'm going to go through some of the changes, and some of these are brand new, but some of these were talked about last year in the forum, and what we're now doing is really consolidating that that's what's going to happen, and we're still open to any conversations that may come about. So if you have it, if you have anything that you want to discuss, please don't hesitate to put it into the chat. And I saw, Milosh, that you put in a comment, so just like waterways in water bodies in base data. Yes. So one of the things that you'll discover is that every specification has a section at the back of the document which summarizes all the changes that we provide. Particularly, as you can see there, where attributes have been removed, codes have been removed. I haven't shown what's been added, but I just wanted to let you know that at the back of the document, you can get the history of what's changed in that document. I want to talk a little bit about GDA shift. I know that this is particularly relevant with Greater Western Waters Spatial Odyssey, and you're probably all over this, and I know that Gaby, you're doing quite a bit of work there with Open Spatial, and there's a project underway. So generally, what we've done in our A-SPEC document is that we have a certification document that is to be provided with every submission of data. So this is a template, and this can also be accessed off the website, and I'll show you how to access that during the wrap up. But essentially, we've created the CSV file. And so we know that if, you know, there's always comments that you can put in there. So whatever the method is that you've used, any specific notes to that particular submission. Now, if it's GDA, capturing the data around the date submitted, construction date, and of course the coordinate datum will identify the GDA. Now, if people are going to use the dynamic datum, which is represented by the Australian Terrestrial Reference Frame, or ATRF 2014, then it's not enough just to specify that. What's also needed is to record the start date of the capture and the end date of the capture. And giving that will be enough, will provide some additional information to give certainty about the kind of shift that occurred. Now, I can't tell you the technicalities about it. What what I'm representing is that it's important that if you're going to use ATRF, then record that additional information. And one of the ICSM statements is to make sure that you record the method and parameters that you've used. Kelly, are our polls operating again?
Which poll would you like to ask?
The one about if people, the GDA shift poll.
It's not ready yet. Sorry, George.
Okay, no problem. Okay. So I apologise for the technical hitch with the polls. We'll do our best to get them back online. So moving on to proposed changes. Previously, we have created 2 lots of documents. One document which just shows the changes, and as you can see on the screen, changes highlighted in yellow and blue. And that's our typical legend. So yellow is new, blue is what's to be removed. And previously, we've had a cut down version of the document which only shows the changes. Now, these are reflected in the full document as well. And we're interested to know if you're happy to see just the proposed changes, or you just prefer to see the full document. And as we haven't got our polls going at the moment, feel free to put in the chat if you would prefer to see the full document, and just put in full document as your comment. Now, the intention of highlighting these is so that at a glance you can see where the changes are and what they are. The next few slides are about specific community requests that have come in, and some of these have applied to every specification. So we've referred to these in every forum. This is probably the biggest one that's come about, where the area works extent boundary is used to identify all the project information and all the assets related to that project. The current requirement is to use some spatial querying to assign all of the data within the project boundary to all of the assets that sit within the project boundary. So what happens when some assets sit outside of the project? It creates more work for the consultant. So what we've done is that we've created an area work ID, and I'll show you that in a few slides' time. But the intention of that is that the area of work extent boundary has an ID, and then that ID is applied as an attribute in every other table. So no longer do you need to do that spatial querying. You can just create a foreign key with the area work extent ID that links to all the project data. Can you please remove confusion in universal file names? Yeah, absolutely. We not intentional, but we could see that with that small example on the left there, that the gravity pipes are on gravity, and then gravity pipe miscellaneous text is also on the gravity layer. Well, it's just not possible. So what we've done is we've just renamed it. So if there is any text, miscellaneous text associated with it, it just gets provided in a different file name. And if that's the case, then it will have the area work ID as an attribute requirement, just so we can link it to that. And it's up to your organization whether you want to bring it in or not. And we're just making sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. What you'll see through these requests is is the extent of them. There's a cross section of what may be considered a minor one, such as the GRP, added as a pipe material, not just a relining material, right through to something more impactful like the first two. So all requests are dealt with the same priority. If it's important enough for you to make the request, then we spend the time to address it. And if we don't, we expect to be held to account as to why we didn't address it. Dealing with BIM and Revit compliance. Now, Gaby is going to talk more about it in his section in Tech Tips. But essentially, we're clear that from a Revit compliance perspective, in terms of A-SPEC now I'm talking about. So we know that BIM is a process, and that's fine, and a lot of organisations now have the maturity to use that process. And we also know that from a 3D drawing perspective, that the Revit is just one of those tools. So I'm just going to focus on Revit at the moment. But what we do know is that there are classification systems that are used that are made up of libraries for specific objects within the Revit environment. They can cover Uniclass, Omniclass, IFCs, Industry Foundation classes, and others. From our perspective, it doesn't really matter what classification system you use. What's important is how can you output that to a schedule that is A-SPEC compliant? And that's what Gaby is going to show you, how to create those schedules so that the data that is held in the Revit drawing can automatically populate these schedules that can then be exported, maybe through a SQL query, and that data incorporated into the asset management system, assign an asset ID, and then you have a direct link between your Revit drawing and your asset management system. We know that that's possible. We've seen some organisations do it, but it doesn't seem to be a common thing at the moment, and we're happy to have a broader conversation with you. We're also going to be guided by our own members, particularly in the water sector, because there seems to be a greater level of maturity and sophistication there in dealing with newer technology.
And also, George, just note Milosh's comments, please. Can you see the comments?
Yes, plant 3D, civil 3D, 12D. Yes. Yeah, thanks, Milosh. So we will be working with our members to see how that applies. We know that with Gaby can talk specifically about civil 3D. 12D, we encourage the users of 12D to go back to the 12D company and say, show us how you can output to A-SPEC. How are you addressing VDAS? Again, we're going to be guided by our members, and in particular, we've had starting conversations with Melbourne Water to see how they're addressing it. So it's a watching brief for us. We've got particular perspectives around advocating particular classification systems. Our view is, what is it that the asset owner needs to be able to manage that asset, and where can we get that data from? Onboarding for contractors. How do we do that? This is a really important aspect, and it's come about from a question: can we distribute the A-SPEC material to the contractors? Our recommendation is no. And the reasons for that is that when we're onboarding, we're looking at what is it that the consultant needs to know to make sure that they're powerfully set up to be able to deliver what's needed. So we start by having them sign a non-disclosure agreement. And once they sign the non-disclosure agreement, it's no different to every member organisation who signed a non-disclosure agreement. It's to protect the intellectual property and the copyright in there. Once that's signed, the consultants have access to all of the material that the member organisations have access to. And apologies, my phone's ringing and I don't have anybody in at the office at the moment. So I'm just pulling the phone off the hook. And it can go to voicemail. So once the NDA is signed, we provide login access, but we also have a conversation with the consultant. We want to find out, have you done this before? Have you provided digital data? What kind of systems are you using? Oh, you're using 12D or you're using QGIS. Have you got the processes in place? Oh, what are you doing out in the field? So we delve into what their current capability is and support them where we need to support them. So that's why we recommend that when a consultant engages with you about what do we need to know about A-SPEC, by all means point them to GISA, and we will support them where we can. How does AS5488 align with A-SPEC? This is Gaby's favourite topic. So I know that he'll chime in here. So I'm only going to talk about a couple of things here. So some of you who are familiar with AS5488 know that there's two parts to it. And one part is based on the quality levels of that you've used to define what's in the ground. So quality level A is the highest level in terms of the accuracy of what's been determined. So whether you've used ground penetrating radar or design plans, or you've opened up a trench, it's AS5488 is there to provide guidance to the location-based companies to confirm how they've identified that there are assets there. From an A-SPEC perspective, we advocate that we are at A+ level because the accuracy is from field capture directly. So therefore it's at the higher level. Now the table that you see on the left is, we've identified this for D, S and W. It's a roadmap to say, well, if people start with the AS5488 requirement, then what else is needed to fully comply with the A-SPEC requirement? So we've got that table in there sitting in S-Spec that you can have a closer look at. And Gaby has been on the technical committee for the last couple of updates. I've also provided some comment to it. So we're happy to have a conversation with you about how it applies to your environment and the interdependencies between A-SPEC and 5488. What happens when a code doesn't exist?
I just wanted to note Milosh's comments again, George, around VDAS.
Okay. Thanks, Milosh. I can see that our meeting is well overdue. So, maybe we have Milosh speaking at our showcase. Kelly, maybe you can follow up with Milosh. I'm sure he won't mind having and I know that it goes against the gender policy that you have, Kelly, but we're looking for the subject matter experts.
I'll have a chat with Milosh and we'll come up with something. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. So what happens when a code doesn't exist? We have a code called C comment. It's really that simple. And what does that relate to? Well, if a code doesn't exist, we don't want the submission to fail. We want a value to go into that field, and then whatever the new feature is that relates to the code is entered into the comments field. Now, again, Gabby's going to talk more about that, about how the API and the web app that he's developed can be applied to make note of these new features. But for all intents and purposes, the C comments field is there. We did have one council say to us, "Oh, we've got too many values in C comments." And I asked them, "So why don't you enter the value that was provided with the C comment?" So we're working through that. Still on community requests, omission of existing assets from submissions. What do we mean by that? We're not saying don't supply existing assets. It's really important, particularly for connectivity purposes. If you've designed an extension to a sewer or a water main, or they're brand new features, you want to know where the connecting point is, where the outlet point is. Don't present the existing asset so it can be confused as a new asset. And sometimes it's as simple as the unique ID represents, it includes EX as part of the unique ID. So instead of it being access point 123, it might be access point EX123. And when it's EX123, all that's already existing, if the asset owner wants you to confirm what's there, perfect opportunity, populate the information that's required to confirm that the asset exists and its location is verified. And then the asset owner can extract all of that detail as they need to, and not have it represent as a new asset and then be duplicated in the valuations and so on. Data formats. From our perspective, what we're seeing is that there are two primary data formats: Esri shapefiles, or data exchange formats, I should say, Esri shapefiles and MIF-MID. We also advocate GeoPackage, which is an OGC compliant package. And we also acknowledge that the AC/DC process requires that consultants utilize the DWG formats. It's not the DWG formats that get provided to the council at the end, because through the AC/DC process, one of the outputs is a shapefile. So therefore, it complies with the requirements of a shapefile being delivered. We're asked this all the time. How can we get our as-built data as part of the handover process? Well, we talked about the checklist a bit earlier. But what we're really doing, the conversations I have, I ask three questions. Well, 3 questions/statements. Look at your process for enforcing the provision of compliant data before you sign off. That's the first thing. What does your process look like? We know that asset handover focuses on the physical asset being handed over, but what we're talking about is the asset and asset data handover process. We're making a distinction that there is data required to be provided as part of the handover process. So the next question is, how do you deal with the non-compliance conversation? Do you say no compliant data, no sign-off, or not? We advocate and strongly recommend that you have that as part of your handover process. Now, why do I say non-compliance conversation? Because it's broader than just dealing with a consultant, because you may have protocols of going through your subdivision development area or your capital works project management area. It's a broader conversation to get alignment across your business as to what the roles and responsibilities are of each entity within your business, to make sure that it's the best experience possible internally and externally. And the other question that we ask is, are you doing any spot audits so you build confidence in your data suppliers? This has come up quite a few times, particularly with a variety, with a number of systems, you know, SQL, Oracle, others. And we know, you know, even in the GIS environments, we know that there are reserved words in there that can't be used. What I've given you is an example that it may come in as the attribute may, for access points, might be type. But it doesn't need to be type in your system. You may call it AP_type. How you map it into your system is completely at your discretion. If it fits within your system to use those exact attribute names, go right ahead. If it doesn't, then take responsibility and control over what it can be in your system so that you don't have these kinds of conflicts. Gaby's constantly talking to me about how can we resolve that issue? How can we resolve that issue? And I say to Gaby, it's not necessarily our issue to resolve. We need to be aware of it, but there are so many variations depending on what the configuration is of the system, what the platform is, that it is far easier for the end recipient of that data to deal with those. And then whatever comes in can be mapped specifically to that. Digital twins and digital engineering, we've spoken about that. We're constantly asked about that. We've covered it off previously, and you can see from Milosh that there's a lot of conversations at Melbourne Water about how they're dealing with things. And I notice that, and I'll come back to your comment, Shane, in just a moment, but one of the things that we're finding is removal of unnecessary attributes. Okay, base RL, access, diameter. Why are they being removed? Because they're not seen as a requirement, because we've got other attributes there that a base RL can be determined, such as the depth. The access diameter, well, access diameter doesn't make sense if you don't have a circular access point. If it's really important, then that can be recorded as a comment. If you feel strongly that we need to keep access diameter for circular based assets, let us know and we'll incorporate that. Matching drawings to narrative. Update drawings to better reflect requirements. So I'm going to, the next couple of slides, go through that to show you what I mean. So in this particular case, we spoke earlier about the area work extent boundary. So in this instance, you can see that there are two instances where assets are outside of the work area work extent boundary, and it creates issues. And it also creates issues if the work extent boundaries are overlapping and two lots of submissions are provided at the same time. So we have recommended that the area work ID boundary that's created for the area work extent attribute is actually recorded in every table. And I've given you an example there of how it's going to be included in the gravity sewer. So we think that that will actually simplify that whole process because it's already been recorded. In this particular instance, we saw that our current diagram says access point depth on the right-hand side. We've actually updated the diagram to show that the access point depth is actually to the lowest accessible point. So if if the area is benched and the invert level is the lowest accessible point, then that becomes the depth. However, if there's a drop in that access point and the lowest accessible part of that access point is below the invert level, then that's where the depth measurement goes to. Now that diagram doesn't completely reflect that, and we'll have a look at showing another diagram that does actually reflect that. We've also got new and updated diagrams. Here's an example where we have other network structures as a, in this case, a settlement pond. And really what we're talking about is just providing some clarity and guidance to, okay, what are we capturing? And in this case, you can see a polygon around the internal perimeter of that particular network structure. Now, this is what's proposed. If the authorities that are on here and request a different diagram to represent network structures, by all means, we are all ears. Milosh's question about have we mapped A-SPEC to the VDAS concept of exchange information requirements? Not yet. But what we want to do is work with an authority that is looking at that so we can see how that plays out. We haven't spent a lot of time on that at the moment with VDAS, but it's something that's on our to-do list. And now that it's been raised by you a couple of times, Milosh, we'll escalate that as a priority to have a look at. Changes. Shape files are intended to be imported into CAD, thus creating a CAD file. Yep, that's fine, going that way. No problem about that. What we're saying is that the CAD file is not a compliant A-SPEC file for delivery because it's not GIS ready. Some other things, we've updated our diagrams, had a look at what the diagrams were, and we just clarify. Again, just removing some ambiguities and providing some clarity. In this particular case, Gaby will show how to leverage 3DIM and BIM through the example that he's going to show. However, what I'm going to show you is how do we deal with a compound or a precinct, and how do we leverage the A-SPEC suite? So in this case, we're going to look at this particular area, and I showed this last year, but we're going to continue to show this to show an example of how to do it. Now, this is a real world example through one of our clients, Central Coast Council, who have adopted S&W spec, and they've given us permission to show this information. So we look at this scenario, and what I'm going to do is just run this while I talk to it. So you can see that there's a variety of assets that we're now looking at. The road infrastructure, the landscape infrastructure. There's other infrastructures for building footprints and hard stands, which has now become a new asset class out of doing this project. The position of the mechanical plant, the position of the building. So essentially what we're doing is giving an example of how A-SPEC fits into the capture of assets across a precinct. New asset classes. There are no proposed asset classes at this stage. We're undertaking a review of what we currently have to make sure it's, that things are captured in the most appropriate way. But don't hesitate to suggest new asset classes for us to consider. So what we are considering is utility tunnels. It's not a high priority at the moment. because it hasn't been mentioned as by any of our members, but we've seen this is a high priority internationally with other utilities, and we want to make sure that if it does come around, that we do provide some guidance about how to capture utility tunnels. And you can see that there's a whole range of assets in there, you know, from rail access to conduits to electric, so lighting, all of those sorts of things. So we want to make sure that we've got some guidance where we need to. Primary changes, the area work
George,
identifier.
you had a poll there. Did you want to run a poll?
Yes, thanks.
What was the question?
What other asset classes would you consider? Okay, thanks, Kelly. So in this case, you can the major changes have been the area works identifier and where assets have not had a unique identifier. In S-Spec's case, we've only had one asset class which has not had a unique identifier, and that's property connections. So we've added area work identifier and unique identifier into that table, but every other table has only had area work identifier added. You can see that there are minor changes where attributes have been removed or attributes have been added. Again, you can find that in section 6 of the document. We have created a new table for access point polygon to fit with our criteria to make sure that each object can be processed. We know that it's difficult for objects to be processed if there's no identifier. So in this particular case, we want to link the access point polygon, which we spoke about earlier, with the access point, which is one of the deliverables. And they are the three key attributes that are going to be recorded. Source codes. There are some codes that only exist, that can only be used in existing. Why? Because they're not relevant to new assets. If new assets are all about as constructed information, then capturing off a screen is not. We have a new code list, cover material. So again, it's to make sure that we reflect things. Gaby's going to talk about the code list API and the web app. The code lists are still available on the website through spreadsheets. We continue to clarify things. This example is about having appropriate entries. In this particular case, we've removed ambiguities where we had precast in the construction method, and then we had precast concrete in the access point material. We've actually, you can see we're removing it to show material is just material. Construction is construction, and so the combination of the two will give the answer required. And the same in this case. In protective material type, we've determined that brass is not necessarily a protective material type. Now, if you have an instance to where it is, please don't hesitate to tell us, and we can add it. We can make sure that it's not removed. The fitting types, that is about being clear about, rather than having a symbol and assuming everybody recognizes the symbol for the degree, we're replacing that with the word degree. So they're the kind of things that we're constantly looking at improving. Now, it doesn't make a big difference. However, it's about creating certainty about what to expect and removing the need for people to interpret, you know, what does that symbol mean? You know, we had an instance yesterday where Gaby was showing us that he imported that particular description into Excel, and Excel created a completely different symbol, which became a question mark or inverted commas. It's like, well, it completely lost the intention of what that symbol is for. So we're always looking for those sorts of things. Now, phase in time. Can you bring up the poll for phase in time, please, Kelly? Because this is the last poll before Gabby's tech talk. And so we've been running this right throughout the all the forums, and we'll run it again next week for our W-SPEC. So essentially, what we'd like to know is your preference for a phase-in period 2, 3, or 6 months? So what do we mean by that? So our intention is to publish these documents, as in go live, that they are relevant from January next year. So if you suggest that it's a 2-month period, then they would be applicable from, you would have 2 months to phase in all the changes that are being proposed, and therefore from March they would be live, and that would be expected to be delivered. So predominantly.
We've only had a couple of answers to that poll. If you could all please just take 2 seconds to answer that one, and also the API code list, that'd be great.
Yep, and that can come up during the API code list. You can wait to respond to that after Gaby has his talk in the tech talk. So at this point, I'm going to leave you. So Gaby, I'm going to give you access so that you can present.
And I've already got access, George. Kelly has done that.
Beautiful. So I will jump off now and wait for you. So next half hour is yours, Gaby.
Right. Thank you for that, George. Kelly, can you see my screen? Can everybody see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yes, S-Spec
yes.
Tech Talk. Thanks, Gaby.
Yeah. All right, so this is in short what I want to talk about today. I'll start off by talking very quickly about spatial relationships. Now, we use these, we pay special attention to these when we do data validations or when we help people to do data validations. And as George indicated earlier on, these are implied, or they're not just implied, they are described in the documents, all over the documents. And what we've done is we've just brought those spatial relationships together, and this is just a summary of the kinds of relationships that are there. And I'm using specific words, and I've got a few diagrams there. So when something is covering or something is inside something else, the same symbol, it's just two different perspectives. We've got one called disjoint. It means that two things should not touch. They should not cross over or have any sort of relationship. Overlap or crossover, two things where one part is partly crossing over or overlapping another, where start and end points touch, and where polygons may touch. So we've got a spreadsheet and I'm just using this when we for our own purposes. And I've got two types of colors there, and all sorts of different kinds of relationships that we're defining. And I want to encourage people, when you do data validation, consider having something like this. Consider having some way in which you test those spatial relationships, because a lot of the data that we found will disobey some of these rules, and then there's a lot of backwards and forwards and issues that come up with that. Now, just quickly talk about these, I've got, if you look at area extents versus area extents, I've got a relationship called disjoint. What I mean by that is normally area extents should not cross over other area extents. Now I've used this specific color, and that's just my own convention. And in terms of that, it really is, it's not an absolute must, it's a should. So area extent should not cross over another area extent if it's submitted in the same data package. That doesn't normally happen. It's just so for me, it means that it raises a warning and something to go and investigate. And if there is a reason why they are crossing over, then we can accept that. But gravity pipes versus gravity pipes, they should not cross over, and so forth. So we've got this spreadsheet, it's just a little matrix, and it helps us to validate, verify what those different relationships are. And if anybody is interested in having getting a copy of this spreadsheet for your own tests, then you're welcome to get in touch with me, and we can make that available. But for me, it's a live document. So as we discuss with clients, then sometimes a relationship goes in here, and it, that we didn't see in the documents before, or we have a discussion with George. And so this is a live document, and point is just that we're prepared to share that. Okay. Moving on, let's talk about codes. The first thing I want to talk about is the C comments code that's often used in code lists. Now, George has mentioned this before. So if the idea behind a C comments code is that if there is something in the field that I've come across that I don't have a code for, then I'll put in the field C comments, and in the comments field I'll put in whatever it is I think is required or needed to be put into that field. The problem is that sometimes there's multiple fields in the same record that needs a C comments. And so what I've tried to do over here is to say field ABC. So in the in the comments field itself, to use a structure that's something like this: field ABC dash the value for that one, and then field DEF dash and the value for that one, so that it's very clear which part relates to each field. And the other comment I'd like to make about the C comments field: you should not have any C comments that goes into your main GIS database ever. These things should be resolved before they enter the main GIS or asset databases. You should have clarity in terms of what goes into those databases. So this is a good mechanism, but it's a mechanism to help manage those issues when you don't have a code for something. Instead of waiting around and for the submission not to go through, here's a mechanism, but make sure that this does not go into your database, because we've had people say, oh, but we've got so many C comments, and sometimes I look at people's databases and there's C comments everywhere, and it's a, in my opinion, it's a misuse of that mechanism, because that mechanism is there to really manage the non-availability of a comment. And that brings me to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm just going to quickly open up my just going to quickly talk about the code list. Now, I think people who've come to these seminars, you all know that we've developed at Digital Hive, we've developed a code list application. If you go to the Digital Hive website and page ID 155, if you want to have the shortcut for that, then you'll see that there's a link to our online application, which is this thing over here. And I wanted to very quickly talk about that a little bit. If you scroll down on the link, you'll see that there is a public at whereabouts username and a password code public. And what that will do is it'll allow you to browse the online code list application, and it's free and accessible for anybody. And we want to make that available so that people can go and browse the code list. So if I go to that application, I have these different menu items. I want to talk about each of those very quickly. If I go to the public code list, this contains all the codes that's current in the code list. And you can filter by various things by just typing at the top of the code. So if you want to know, what all the access point materials are, or what are the codes that are part of the access point materials, just type that in, and it will automatically filter for you. Now, you can now go and say, oh, I want to actually see everything, so show me 100 records, and it'll list all of the ones that's in that particular list. And you can go, and if you wanted to copy that out so that you can use it in some other application, if you click on copy, that puts it in the clipboard, or extract it as a CSV or as a PDF. And just at that point, this does not replace George's online list, because George's online list, Gis's online list is a complete list with extra bits of information, but this gives you a digital copy of that. If you wanted to know what a particular code is, so if I have something like PSTYB, for instance, all right, then so I get this code, I don't know what it means. I can very quickly go and look, this is polystyrene blocks. Or if I want to know what the code is for something that I work with, I just can't remember the code. So let's say I go fiber cement, type in fiber, and it will filter, and I can go and find, oh, actually I'm looking for fiber optic, and there's the code that I'm looking for. So this part of the application is just there to make it easy for you to get access to the latest codes that's available. The other two parts, this actually came out of a request from one of our users, and that's to submit new codes. And if you want to see the list of submissions by other users, then you can go to list of requests. So if I go to list of requests, then you'll see here's a list of what people have asked for. So if you're sitting with a problem with a particular code and you need to use a C comments, come over here and see, has it already been submitted? And if so, maybe you can add a comment to that. Now, as a non-registered user, you can see the details of it, but you cannot edit anything. And so we would encourage you to register for each of those. Even if you go to the new code list, this is not accessible. So as a generic user, you really we just can't allow that if we don't know who the users are. So encouraging you to go to the website, go and register, ask for access to you or your team. And a lot of people have asked us for access, but then they want to have access for an entire team, and we're happy to provide that. George will talk about that a little bit later on again, but access is free until the end of this financial year. No, not the financial year, the calendar year, I believe. And so there's a bit of time to get people to have a look and to work through these codes, work with them, see if this is useful for you. What's behind the scenes here is a database application that also produces an API. So if your IT department wants to build an application to provide the latest version of the codes to applications that serve to other people, then you can use the API to extract the data and always have the latest data available to your users. All right, I think I've spoken about most of those things. Right, going to move on to talking about BIM integration. So we all know that BIM is a methodology that is used to manage infrastructure assets throughout the life cycle, and a lot of people are now starting to use that methodology. One of the problems that a lot of people have is that all these applications that we need in order to manage our assets, you have a GIS, you've got asset management, you've got BIM tools, and they don't necessarily talk to one another. And there's so many different ways, exchange formats and others. So what we thought is we wanted to work through a process whereby we could build an integration that's based on A-SPEC. And so we've worked together with an organization called Education Horizons, and we've built, it's a proof of concept process. Now, what the process does is we've used quite a bit of some scripting, and there's a built-in tool within Revit. So we've used Revit to do this. And so if you wanted to do something similar, the process would be that you have to first of all go and build what's known as a shared parameters file within Revit, and you have to make sure that you set that up as the shared parameters file is all of the attributes that's in A-SPEC. You have to have a list of all those A-SPEC, those not associated with any particular asset class. And here is our list that we've compiled. And what you then have to do is you create that in a particular format for Revit, and it's a text document, but something you can't edit. You've got to go through this other process. And then you have to take those shared parameter files, and you've now got to build your asset classes within Revit using those. And that's the process that's the first part of the process that we did. Once you've got that, if you query anything in Revit, you won't actually see the assets or the attributes there. So we had to go and build another process whereby we start to link data. Now, what we've done in terms of that is we've used the A-SPEC spreadsheets that you can download. So we've actually used a spreadsheet, and we're extracting the data out of that so that we can build an asset class using each of those spreadsheets. And thereby we can build a process that will allow us to, or allow the user to link the data that's in asset management system, the BIM or the GIS, and it's within Revit. There's an automated process. If you go and look over here, once you've got it all done, then you can run this scripting language in the background, and all it means is that changes that you make in the one system will be reflected in the other, and that's what we wanted to do, and that's done via WKT or database linkages. All right. That's all I wanted to say about that one. And to move on. So in terms of the GDV Hub, we spoke about GDV Hub before. Now that's an online data validation tool, and the normal validations are there. What we've done in the meantime is we've built an auto correction process, and so what's available at this stage in terms of auto correction is, if you've made spelling errors that we can correct, we'll correct those. If you make if there's case errors, and we can correct those, then we'll correct those, and things like data types or spatial types, correct those as necessary. And here's a very quick video. I'll just quickly talk you through that. So the process allows you to upload a zip file of your project, and once uploaded, then actually once selected, you click upload. It actually uploads it to the system then, in the way that you've got, and you'll see that on the left hand side, nothing is or very few things are actually mapped, and basically you go through the process to go and map all of your asset classes. Now what I want to mention here is that towards the end, you'll see that we save these mappings, and once it's saved, you can reuse them. So what you see also on the left-hand side there is that not all the fields have been mapped. So you get the opportunity to go and map and make sure that you've mapped it at class level, but also at attribute level. And once that's done, you hit continue. You can go and manage the schema mappings. You give it a name. So if your organization has a particular naming convention that you use, you come and set that up, map it the way that you want it, save it, and then every time that you come back, then you wouldn't have to redo the mapping, and it will remember that for you. It will then go through, run through, and it's now reading the data and actually fixing whatever it can fix. And when it's done, hit the continue. My video is slower than my voice overs. And you can then go and view the corrected output. And that will actually give you a zip file with shape or whatever it is that you've submitted in terms of the corrected output. And you can also then generate a report, and that report will show you the things that have been corrected. And so there you can see 38 pipes. And after the correction, how many errors are left. Right, enough of that. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about is that we've developed a project file renaming utility. And we did this in response to some of our users, or some of the A-SPEC users, who have mentioned to us that very often they have a particular way of working internally. So they often go and name project asset classes or layers, if you like, with a project name underscore and the universal file name. But they can't submit it like that, because submissions like that is in essence not compliant with the A-SPEC or the specification. So we've just developed a small little utility that allows you to do two things. Well, there's two parts to the utility. The first part is that it will strip that project name part and just leave you with the file name and zip it up. the name of the zip file is the name of the project, and then if you then submit that, that's the file names are then accurate. And if you want to undo that, then you unzip it using the utility, and that will put those file names back the way that you work internally. And that is the end of my spiel. Any questions, comments, or over to you, George?
Gaby, while we're waiting for questions or comments, can you talk about your well-hidden photo app utility?
Okay, I can talk about that. So we've developed an application that I want to develop a little bit more, but the intention of that is for people who are doing projects and have to, you have to regularly take photos of progress in terms of a development, and what we do with that is we've given you ability to take photos, but for every photo you can go and assign or link project elements, asset classes. One part of it, you can actually take a photo of an asset. So let's say a pipe that's just newly in the ground, take the photo and it goes into the database. We have AI that's interpreting what it's looking at. Now, that part I don't want to talk about too much yet because we're learning it. But there is a part that will interpret whatever it is looking at and say, okay, this is a pipe and it's this type of pipe, and that goes into a database. Now, the idea behind all of this is that at the end of your project, you can actually report on the project progress, and as things are completed, your database, we're starting to develop your A-SPEC submission by using photos and by using spatial information at different locations. So part of that is already available in terms of the project management elements and photo management. So if anybody's interested, also give us a shout in terms of that. What else, George?
I don't know. What other hidden gems have you got there, Gaby?
Oh, there's a lot of things that we're working on, but I cannot, off the top of my head, think of anything in particular at the moment. So,
people may be interested about the process that you did to create that schedule. Like, obviously it takes a bit of time to create it, but now that you've done it, if somebody came to you and said, listen, here's a Revit drawing, we want you to create all these schedules for us, what would be involved?
Look, we haven't productized that, so it's not a product that we can sell, and I'm not sure that we want to do that, but it is a service that we can sell. So if somebody wants to give us maybe I'll say a little bit more about that. In a customer that we were dealing with recently, they've obviously generated a lot of CAD drawings out of their Revit models, and they generate those for different purposes. But once it's in the CAD, they go and edit, they do various things with it, and it's difficult to get all the stuff back. And then all of a sudden they're expected to develop or to submit their A-SPEC data. So what we can do for somebody who's doing that, you give us your model, we'll map and extract all the assets within that drawing. that creates schedules and with some information in there. If your information is all up to date, if not, then it's something that can go back to you, and you can validate all the nitty-gritties of the data, and then put that into your A-SPEC. I think what makes it easy about that is that it extracts the unique identifiers and actual assets for you. You don't have to go and search for them throughout the model. And it gives it to you in a format that a lot of people are familiar with.
Now, with me being familiar with this, I'm going to ask a leading question, because there's a little gem that you haven't actually passed on. And that is, are you now saying that you can now update data from CAD drawings to Revit and then back again as needed?
Yes, we are saying that. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Gaby. Okay. Anything else?
It's just where I see that process be a lot more interest in that process, or what makes it very interesting for me is the integration with asset management systems and full-on GISs. And when you start talking about digital models, having a tool with which you can easily collate, extract, and manage your assets over time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, on that, okay. Anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay. On that note, I'll get to the wrap up. Can everybody see? Well, Kelly and Gaby, can you see the wrap up screen?
Yep.
Great. Okay. So these are the areas that we'll cover off in the wrap up, and so I'll start off. I'm going to talk about future proofing in just a moment. I've got a few slides around that. Something that I've been presenting at the other forums, and I'd really like to show that again. And for the people that may have seen this before, have a look to see if there's anything that you can see newly out of this for yourselves. Proposed release dates. I'll start with that. The proposed release date, as I mentioned, is going to be January 2023. And from the poll that we ran across all of the forums so far, overwhelmingly, the request has been for a 6-month phase-in period. So that's what we're going to adopt. So that's the first decision that we'll make, and we'll present it again in next week. But out of the polls, the response that come in that poll, it won't actually alter the that time frame. So thank you for everyone who has contributed to that. Code lists. I'll talk a little bit about code lists. So we've just had a look at Gaby's API and web app applications, and they're now available. Gaby or Kelly, can you put into the chat a link to the Digital Hive website that people can register their interest in accessing that? Also, we have, so we'll do that to start with. And so as Gaby mentioned, there'll be free access until the end of December. That's anyone who's attended any of the forums, you'll be provided a free trial until the end of December 2022. And Gaby will provide a login and password so you can get the full experience of what that's like. And of course, there's also the prospect that you'll be beta testing it. So any suggestions for improvements or modifications, don't hesitate to contact Gaby directly through Digital Hive to do that. Following the free trial period, if you want to continue using it, there will be a nominal cost of $215 per annum plus GST, and that's per organisation. For subscribers to the specs, that will be included in your next renewal. So whenever your next renewal is, you will have free access to it from now until your next renewal. Classifications in A-SPEC, just to recap, we know that there are many classifications in play. What Gaby showed you, I thought was a really great example of taking data from one environment into a specific purpose, and that is the A-SPEC schedules, which are about the asset management details about those particular assets. Now, at the moment, they are inventory based to fulfill on A-SPEC. Now, if there is, and I've just thought of this now, Gaby, and you don't need to answer it, but I'm pretty sure that it's quite possible. Now, if the Revit or other 3D environments are holding data about the condition of the asset or got details about the risk or criticality, then by all means, there's no reason why that schedule can't include those specific asset management details that could then be incorporated into the asset management environment. And I think that would be a really great way to utilize those 3D environments in a more proactive manner and collaborative manner. So I want to go on to future proofing. And I'll start with this asset analytics, optimized replacement. And I've spoken about this at every session, and because I think it's really important, and it's also our understanding as well. So I'm not telling you that this is what you need to do. What I'm presenting to you is what we've observed and our learning about the interaction between inventory data, such as A-SPEC, and asset management requirements. So many people would probably be familiar with this traditional approach, which is indicated on the screen at the moment. And what we've seen through engagement with our clients is that the biggest challenge, or amongst the biggest challenge facing asset managers, is knowing the right time to replace an asset and taking into account all the available information. So what we have is a scenario where this new diagram, figure 10, provides the circle, the intersection between the repairs and maintenance costs and the condition, provides an indication of the optimal time to replace an asset. Now, why the three curves? What we also saw was that for critical assets with high criticality, there's a need to replace that asset earlier than what's shown in that middle curve where it gets to condition 5. And also for low criticality, it may be that it gets to condition 5, but because of its criticality, it can be replaced at a later time, identified as the sweet spots. So again, I'm not saying to you, this is what you need to do. I'm just passing on to you what some of our clients have provided to us. And in this case, this came out of some work that we did in New Zealand with the national metadata standards that we helped develop. And along with that, we also saw the impact of probability. And I know with the more sophisticated analytics that are going on with some organizations, what they're seeing, and these two diagrams specifically represent it, you know, the one on the left, which has significant records, as in specific data about those assets, they've got more certainty about when the probability of failure is likely to occur. Whereas the one on the right, there's scant records. So, you know, it's really the best guesstimate. We're also seeing that predictive modeling for renewal forecasts are often best guesstimates because of the kind of data that's held. And I'm going to show that in just a moment, an example of that. Also through our work in New Zealand, we saw that the impact or the influence that as constructed data schema has on these other elements. Now, what I learnt newly out of doing this project was that on the left, you know, on the left-hand side where they've got the schema, they developed a schema for condition, a schema for repairs and maintenance, and all of the other elements, right? Which I'd never actually seen before. And it was really quite clever in a way to harmonize the way and provide guidance to the asset management practitioners to in how they would determine their own analytics. And in that, you can see that the as constructed element plays a big part in all of those asset management schemas. So what I want to show you now, and I showed this during D-SPEC and I'll show it again, I found this a really great example of what's possible when you have data and when you've got confidence in the data. So this was a wastewater renewal forecast that was provided, that was developed by Wellington City Council. And I learnt this during the time that we worked with them, because they took on A-SPEC as the basis to find the gaps in their data and in their schemas. And in doing that, so by doing that, they were able to meet their 30-year renewal forecast, which is one of the key requirements in New Zealand for asset management planning. Now, what I'm going to run is, and I'll show this. So what I'm going to run is an animated PDF. And one of the things that I want you to focus on is there's a number of elements to this. This diagram shows every segment of their wastewater network in this particular catchment or this particular suburb. And this diagram here shows whether it's renewal or growth and a cost, yearly cost. So when I run this, you'll see a graph, table graph, representing that particular year, and down the bottom it's the cumulative spend. Now, just as a matter of investigation, this particular client ran it over a 100-year period based on the data that they knew at that time. So this was created in 2014. So when I run this, the two key things I want you to look at is, and of course there's the legend there that shows you the condition of the assets and the interaction with this. So they've built in some other feeds. So the two key things I want you to look at is this graph at the top, and you can see renewal and growth. So, and you can see the dynamic change of those segments, and that's given that they're feeding in demand, condition, criticality, a whole range of other things. And so when they developed this particular graph, they used statistical language to determine these results, and they use programming language R to create this particular diagram. So I'll run it again, and I'll just pause it in just a moment. So the value that they saw here was that, and I thought this was really cool, in that they could now go to, with confidence, and determine what their capital replacement programs would be. And you can see that over here, you know, $1 million versus over here, $3 and a bit million, and in between, not much. So they're able to go to their finance people and say, you know what, here's what we're going to need. And you're going to see these kind of variations because we now have certainty about our data. And I thought this was a really great example of what you could do when you had confidence in your data that it was complete and accurate. So if you have any questions about that, I'm going to, you know, just let me know, just put it into the chat, and happy to follow up. Our next forum, we're coming to the pointy end. Our next forum is next week. And then the following week, we have our showcase. And we're building our presentations at the moment. Right now, I can, if you caught our networking session at the start, Kelly spoke about inviting the chair of ANZLIC to come and talk about digital twins from a national landscape, what her perspective is on it. So she's following up on that, and we'll confirm that. We've already confirmed that Open Spatial will be presenting, and they're going to provide some insights about their journey through the AC/DC platform and the experience that they've had through that. One Spatial, we've invited One Spatial to talk about two things. One, their project about the National Underground Asset Register that they are creating in the UK. And I thought that'd be a really good project because, you know, I've seen some of the work that's coming out of that and how they're using AI to do some predictive analysis around the kind of repairs and where those repairs are going to cost. So I think Andrew Bashfield is going to talk about that. So I'm really excited to see that. I saw his presentation at Locate this year, and I thought it's just a really cool project to show the challenges of dealing with disparate data sets and the process and engagement that was involved there. Gaby spoke about the joint venture that Digital Hive has with One Spatial to develop the GDV hub. So One Spatial will also present the GDV hub, and I think they're planning on having a live demonstration of that. Andre Makika, the country manager, the Australian country manager, is on this session at the moment, and he'll be available for some questions if you have any pointy questions. He loves answering pointy questions. And we don't have any others confirmed at the moment, but watch this space. You'll see communication coming out from our team. And finally, thank you. You know, we'd like to think that we're getting this right in terms of timing and also content. However, we don't know unless we provide feedback, unless we receive feedback from you. All feedback is good feedback. You know, our intention is that this is an environment that, you know, we can talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is about improving. This is about collaboration. This is about knowledge sharing. A-SPEC is a knowledge sharing community. A lot of the information we provided today came out of requests that we received from members of the community, from the consulting community, as well as the members that subscribe, you know, the water authorities and councils. So we thank you for it. And finally, I just want to thank a number of people from our team. Kelly for moderating the sessions. Kelly's always great at injecting a bit of humour. So thank you, Kelly, and the work that you've done for these sessions. Gaby, as always, I love the commitment to showing relevant conversations around data validation and correction and the importance of process. Thank you for that. I didn't catch if Natalie and Kim were on, but if you are on, I can't see my my people at the moment, but Natalie and Kim work at the back end, and often the messages that you receive from us come from Natalie and Kim, and you'll be seeing more from them as well. So finally, I want to thank everybody who's come along and given your time to your commitment. We will be on here until 12:15. Appreciate your contributions and look forward to seeing you next week and also at the showcase. So thank you very much.